Hi, everybody. I'm here with Sheila Haji for the World Inquiry. And we're going to be talking today about appreciative inquiry impact, that question about the power of appreciative inquiry to help you do things that were unexpected or maybe you thought was impossible to happen. So Sheila, you said you wanted to tell a story about one of your client interactions.
Yes, I do. And thank you so much, Sally. This was and is still an ongoing story. It started in 2015, and I came in to work with a public sector agency that had been experiencing a decline in their employee viewpoint survey, which is an employee satisfaction survey. They had had a 4-year decline in their results. And they, of course, wanted to turn that around. But each year prior to me coming in, and is the way with this public sector agencies, not just with this agency, the focus is typically to drill down on the problem. Whatever the problem is to drill down on that problem, come up with action plans, implement those plans, and hope that the results are positive in the next annual review. Well, obviously that plan had not been very effective over the 4-year period of time with these declining results. What was different about this particular year was they actually, the organization had a new executive director come in, and she wanted to shake things up. She wanted to do something different than what had been done in the past. And so with me coming in also new in response to this RFP, we put our heads together and talked a bit about what was possible. And interestingly enough, this is around the time that I was also accepted into the Taos PhD program. I was working on my proposal. I, hadn't gotten that approved. I didn't, know exactly, if the topic that I was interested in would be approved. But I also saw that this was an opportunity to do something with AI. I had used AI over the years with different clients, but in a situational respect, typically just small interventions, never a systemic application of AI. So I thought, wow, this would be such a fascinating opportunity. I didn't go into it anticipating or expecting or even thinking that this particular agency would be the focal point of my dissertation. And it is not. It is not. But it sparked my interest in knowing more about what was possible for AI. So again, they're not the focal point of my study. But what we decided to do was to really change the narrative in the organization. She really wanted to change this narrative from we are a dysfunctional organization to one where they saw themselves as engaging and positive and transformative. So she really wanted to shift that narrative. And I thought, well, you know what? Let's not go in and drill down on the problems. You already know what the problems are. The surveys pointed out some of the problems. What if we really take this shift in time and think about, and that's just not necessarily what's not working, but what are the strengths in the organization? This organization does great work. And, the people are committed to the work, but where they weren't necessarily committed to each other. So what the intention was that we would make this a long-term, and this contract that initially started, I had a 3-year contract. So I knew that I had the time on my side to do some positive work. Now they had the option of, exercising that contract to a limited extent or a more expanded extent. So I went in with the notion that this could be a long-term positive effort, and she was committed to that as well. So what we decided to do was to make this a true systemic OD change. We started with the senior leadership team and preparing to convene the whole organization. The senior leadership team they had been bickering with each other, a lot of infighting. They were suspicious of the new leader. They thought she wasn't government enough. She was coming in with these newfangled ideas, and they just weren't quite sure about how this was going to go. And so the first meeting that I had with them was about changing their narratives. Okay, what are the stories that you're telling to each other? What are the stories you're telling about each other? And how do you want to shift those stories? And just had a meeting about that. What are the stories that you want to be known for? How do you want others to talk about the organization? And it was a conversation they had never had before. And they started telling stories, and the stories weren't just flowing out. They were coming in dribs and drabs, to be honest. It wasn't like an outpouring of stories. Some were skeptical, some were into it. But the more they started to talk to each other, and I had them actually pair up and tell stories to each other, and then they started telling stories to me. So they did that. And I then prepared them to take those stories to the larger organization. And they were a little shy about it, but they did. And one of the biggest critical voices in the room, he led off the stories with the larger group. We had convened the whole organization. He started telling stories, what he was proud of, the work that he was proud of, why he worked for this organization, what was meaningful about it, what he envisioned and hoped for possibilities for positive change. And it was amazing. And then others started to tell those stories. And then I had people at tables telling their own stories about what they were proud of. Now, that meeting was a success and a kickoff and a launch. But I also solicited feedback, and that's when we got things like, well, what about the elephants in the room? Nobody's talking about the elephants in the room. So we think, okay, well, what about these elephants? What are we talking about? So I actually worked with the director, and we had a place where people could talk about the things that were underlying it, their fears and concerns. We had a survey monkey they could do to submit elephants. And we actually had a plastic elephant sitting next to a box that was a locked box where people could drop in what they thought were the elephants. So so we did it. So anyway, what basically came out, and actually out of this 75 member organization, we only really got 5 elephants. Although that seemed to be a prevailing narrative, they really weren't forthcoming. I mean, the elephants were, they were a few voices, and they talked about management, mistrust of management, not really thinking management was there for them and there for the long haul. So we knew we had to up the ante around, the leadership commitment to a positive engagement with staff. So we did certain things to affect that. And we created monthly meetings with the leadership team to talk with the organization about what they were seeing, what they were envisioning, inviting feedback to actually change real work, the vision, the mission, the values. The employees gave input around what they wanted the values to be. So these were not just the standard values that had existed. We were having real conversations. They were doing peer conversations about what they wanted those things to be. And that input all fed into a values document, a vision document, a mission document. And all of that was put on a SharePoint so they could look at it and people could say, well, yeah, I'd like to see this change. All of that input was valued, and they had never done that before. It wasn't visible. Things weren't visible. Things that had not been visible before became open, transparent. The other thing we started to do is I was also engaged to work with individual teams. And I made the focus of those teams leveraging our strengths. That was the focus, the topic, the objective. And so the team had to, and were invited to talk about what their strengths were, how they wanted to be known, and what could they actually do to affect the way they wanted to be seen in the organization. So it wasn't just talk about how I want to be seen and how we want to be known. They then came up with actual strategies to actually get the organization to see them the way they wanted to be seen. So it was actually enacted, which was amazing. And then we actually had conversations around creating more collaboration. And there was a group of employees, all volunteers. They weren't voluntold, they were actually volunteers. And they went out and they talked to their peers, and they were basically all non-management people. But they went out and talked to everyone around what does good collaboration look like? When are we strongest at a collaboration? And they interviewed people and they got these stories, and they realized that they were doing much more collaboration than they imagined. But the more the stories were told and the more they were telling the stories, they became more confident in their abilities to collaborate, not just within their teams, but across the organization. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that we did was we implemented semi-annual pulse check meetings. In those pulse check meetings, we use SOAR. So I introduced SOAR again. I never said to them we're using appreciative inquiry, but I introduced this. I put up the big posters around the room, and people just went up and they wrote on the posters, or they put Post-it notes up around their strengths and opportunities, aspirations, and results. We did it the first meeting. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. It went great. I summarized all that went into an annual report. And then we started to make sure we did it every year. So that, again, started in 2015. This is now entering in 2019. We're still doing it. I'm going to be with the group again in February. And they're used to it. It's like a ritual now. And to be able to see it. And a lot of the comments around results are, this effort has been contagious. The positivity, the change in the way we see ourselves, it has been contagious. And that's their words. And so it's really exciting to see it. And I see the commitment at the leadership team level. Little things like the director has tea time every Friday, and people can come in and have tea with her and just chit and chat about whatever's going on in their teams. And they wind up coming together. Also, during these semi-annual pulse check meetings, they tend to happen, or one happens always before Thanksgiving. So we do a big Thanksgiving dinner. People bring in food. And it used to be when they would have any kind of meeting where they invited people to come for maybe 10 people would show up. Everybody shows up for these things. Even people who claim that they have an alternative work schedule, they wind up coming in for these Thanksgiving and the meetings. It's quite powerful. So,
and this is ongoing.
This is ongoing. So my contract was extended. So now I'm in my 4th year. It originally was a 1 year with 2-year options. I'm now in my 4th year, and the change in the organization is palpable. People enjoy each other. They laugh. They talk. They convene to share knowledge. They have brown bag sessions where people just say, hey, I got some information that may be industry related, or there's something they know. They come in and people are invited into those brown bags to share information. The level of collaboration, engagement, just the shift in attitude is amazingly different. So it was a wonderful surprise for me to be able to initiate something like this on an enterprise level, on an organizational-wide level, and to see what can happen when an organization commits to it.
Wonderful. What a great story, Sheila. And I thank you so much for spending the time on this and telling us this story. And I'm sure it's a story that people will continue to want to know details about and will continue to want to hear about. So
my pleasure. Thank you so much, Sally.